Have you ever noticed how a woman who speaks with precision, who questions the obvious, or who refuses to play dumb, somehow becomes unsettling to the world around her? She's not loud, not cruel, and yet her presence alone feels like a quiet rebellion. When a woman leads with her mind rather than her charm, society doesn't know where to place her. It calls her intimidating, cold, too much. But what if intelligence isn't what threatens people? What if it's what intelligence reflects back at them? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So maybe it's not that intelligent women are frightening. Maybe they simply hold up a mirror and people aren't ready to look. Let's start with a truth that's rarely said out loud. Society is not built to comfort intelligent women. It admires their achievements in theory, but in practice, it punishes them for the emotional reactions they evoke. Think about the word intimidating. It sounds almost flattering, doesn't it? Like a compliment in disguise. But when you look closer, it's actually a social code, a subtle warning. It doesn't mean you're too brilliant. It means your clarity disrupts my illusion. You see, every social group operates on a silent hierarchy of comfort. We reward the familiar, the predictable, the agreeable. And intelligence, especially in women, doesn't play by those rules. When a woman articulates a complex idea without hesitation, she breaks the unspoken contract of likability. She stops performing warmth as validation. She refuses to dilute her insight into something digestible. And this disruption doesn't only challenge men. It unsettles everyone who's attached to a simplified version of reality, because intelligence doesn't flatter, it illuminates. And illumination exposes what's been hidden: insecurity, ignorance, fear. When you encounter someone who understands the world more deeply than you do, your ego feels cornered. It's a biological response, an activation of threat. Your brain senses potential humiliation before your conscious mind can reason it away. And so, defense mechanisms rise: dismissal, mockery, silence. Now imagine this happening, not just in a one-on-one conversation, but in a group. Suddenly the emotional temperature changes. In a private exchange, curiosity might survive. But in public, when others are watching, intellect becomes social danger. Because the crowd's survival instinct whispers, "Don't challenge the status order." So instead of listening, people reframe. They label her arrogant, difficult, or too intellectual. And beneath those words lies the same primitive equation. She threatens the balance that keeps us feeling safe. When Carl Jung spoke about the collective unconscious, he was describing more than a pool of shared symbols. He was talking about a deep, ancient rhythm inside the social body, a rhythm that resists whatever it cannot easily classify. And an intelligent woman, especially one who has integrated both intellect and intuition, becomes the very embodiment of what that collective finds hard to digest. Because she violates archetypes. The nurturer, the muse, the lover. These are scripts society wrote for women centuries ago, and intelligence doesn't always fit neatly inside them. When she questions, analyzes, debates, she disrupts not only expectations but identities. People start to ask, if she doesn't play her role, what does that mean for mine? That's the hidden fear behind the label, intimidating. It's not about her tone, or her presence, or her achievements. It's about what her existence exposes in others, their dependence on illusion. When you strip away the myth of the pleasant woman, you also strip away a collective comfort. And comfort is a form of social currency. We trade it daily, in smiles, in small talk, in pretending not to notice contradictions. An intelligent woman refuses that trade. She doesn't sell comfort, she sells clarity. And clarity is expensive, because it demands transformation. Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, repress, or deny. We prefer not to see them, because they threaten the story we tell about who we are. But the shadow doesn't disappear, it projects outward. And one of its favorite screens is the woman who refuses to shrink. When people look at an intelligent woman and feel a sudden tension, an urge to criticize, to mock, to dismiss, what they're actually reacting to is their own disowned intellect. The part of themselves that once wanted to question, to know, to think freely, but was told it was safer to conform. She becomes the vessel of their unlived potential. and potential, when unacknowledged, curdles into envy. That's why admiration so easily turns to resentment. It's why I wish I were like her can quietly mutate into who does she think she is. The shadow hates being seen, and intelligence, especially expressed through a woman, sees too much because she doesn't only analyze facts. She reads subtext, she notices emotional patterns, she names contradictions others survive by ignoring. In Jungian terms, she awakens the collective's complexes, those sensitive spots of unresolved psychic pain. And so people defend themselves the only way they know how, by diminishing the source of discomfort. They call her cold because she refuses to perform constant emotional reassurance. They call her arrogant because she speaks from knowledge rather than approval. They call her unnatural because she's not defined by others' needs. But underneath every accusation lies the same confession. You remind me of something I lost in myself. When we say that intelligent women scare society, what we're really describing is a collective psychological defense, a massive projection of shadow content onto those who dare to think differently. It's easier to call her intimidating than to admit our discomfort with truth. It's simpler to mock her confidence than to question why we surrendered our own. Because if we looked too closely, we might have to meet the very parts of ourselves we abandoned. And that's the first quiet revolution intelligence starts, not by changing others, but by forcing them to confront themselves. The mirror she holds is not cruel, it's just honest. But honesty, in a world addicted to masks, feels like violence. There's a reason the world doesn't quite know what to do with intelligent women. Not because intelligence itself is new, but because female intelligence defies narrative. For centuries, culture has relied on archetypes to keep order. The nurturing mother, the loyal wife, the muse who inspires but never competes. These are psychic templates, Jung's collective patterns of meaning, and for generations they've defined what acceptable femininity looks like. But the thinking woman doesn't fit the script. She embodies the archetype the collective has not yet integrated, the woman with logos, the union of mind and soul. Jung warned that whenever the collective refuses to integrate a new archetype, it doesn't disappear. It turns dark. The repressed energy becomes shadow material, projected, distorted, feared. So instead of celebrating the woman who thinks society demonizes her, it calls her unnatural, unlovable, unfeminine. Just as the witch once symbolized female intuition, the intimidating woman now symbolizes female intellect. Centuries ago, the witch was burned not for her magic, but for her knowledge, for her refusal to obey. She was the one who knew things she wasn't supposed to know. And in that sense, every intelligent woman carries the echo of that archetype. She is the modern witch, not in ritual or spellcraft, but in consciousness. She studies patterns. She perceives motives. She sees the unseen mechanisms of power, and like every witch before her, her insight threatens the systems built on ignorance. In today's world, the pyres are gone, but the punishment persists in subtler forms: social exclusion, career sabotage, the slow erosion of confidence through 1,000 micro-rejections. A woman who dares to understand often pays for it in loneliness, because every insight costs her another illusion, and illusions are the currency of belonging. Jung called the persona the mask we wear to function in society. It's not evil, it's necessary. But for intelligent women, the mask often feels suffocating. They learn early how to hide their intellect behind diplomacy, to soften their language, to laugh at what isn't funny, to disguise analysis as empathy. Not because they are ashamed, but because they know that too much clarity too soon can shatter fragile egos. This split creates a quiet tragedy, the constant negotiation between authenticity and acceptance, between the true self that seeks truth and the social self that seeks survival. That's why so many brilliant women describe a kind of double consciousness. They can read the room and think beyond it simultaneously. They understand that truth without timing becomes violence, and yet holding back feels like betrayal. The tension becomes unbearable, a spiritual claustrophobia that no amount of success can soothe. Jung described the animus as the inner masculine energy within the female psyche. the archetype of logic, structure, and authority. In a patriarchal culture, that energy is projected outward, onto fathers, leaders, lovers, mentors. But when a woman integrates her animus, she no longer seeks permission to think, she becomes her own authority. And that's where the real fear begins. Because a woman who no longer depends on external approval is not just intelligent, she's autonomous. And autonomy is the death of control. Such a woman doesn't rebel by shouting, she rebels by knowing, by understanding the very systems designed to define her, by seeing how power disguises itself as protection. And once she sees, she can never unsee. Knowledge becomes her revolution. When a woman reaches that point of inner integration, society's last defense is projection. It casts her as the villain to preserve its own innocence. She's called heartless for being rational. She's called emotional when she dares to critique. Whatever doesn't fit the mold must be pathologized. But projection is a mirror too, just inverted. Every accusation reveals a hidden truth. She scares me because she can't be controlled. She unsettles me because she knows herself. She threatens me because she's free. Freedom, after all, is contagious. Once witnessed, it can't be unseen. And that's why intelligent women are not just individuals, they're symbols. They represent what happens when a collective myth begins to fracture, when half of humanity stops living as reflection and starts living as consciousness. So the fear of intelligent women isn't just personal, it's mythological. It's the collective's resistance to evolution itself. Because every step toward integration feels like death to the old story. And old stories never die quietly. There's a moment in every intelligent woman's life when she realizes that understanding is not always a gift, it's a threshold, a crossing. And once you walk through it, you can't return to the world as it was. Because awareness is irreversible, you can close your eyes again, but you'll never be blind again. And that realization, as empowering as it sounds, is also profoundly lonely. The cost of seeing clearly is the gradual loss of belonging. You begin to notice how often conversations are performances, how people mistake noise for depth and agreement for connection. You hear the rehearsed laughter, the unspoken competition, the quiet fear behind confidence, and you realize most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They don't want mirrors. They want praise. They don't want to think. They want to be reassured that they don't have to. And suddenly, what once felt like home starts to feel like exile. Intelligence was never meant to make someone superior. It was meant to make them aware. But awareness expands faster than the structures that can hold it. It stretches beyond small talk, beyond social rituals, beyond the safety of pretending. And that expansion hurts, because every truth you discover replaces one illusion you used to need. You start losing the illusions of compatibility, of certainty, of control. Even love begins to shift. You no longer fall for the promise of completion. Because you see through it, you know that no one can complete you, only meet you, and very few know how. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." For the intelligent woman, this loneliness is not physical, it's existential. She can sit among friends and still feel unseen, not because they don't care, but because she has learned a language they don't yet speak. The language of nuance, of paradox, of self-confrontation. There's a strange paradox to seeing clearly. The more you understand, the harder it becomes to judge. You stop labeling people as good or bad, and begin to see their wounds, their conditioning, their projections. You understand why they fear what they fear, why they say what they say. And understanding replaces anger with compassion, but compassion too is isolating. Because you can't join in the outrage, you can't feed the drama. You see the pattern too clearly to mistake it for chaos. The world tells her, be softer, but softness is not her problem. Clarity is, and clarity always feels cold to those who live in fog. So she learns to hold both truths at once, that she loves humanity, but often cannot bear its noise, that she wants connection, but not at the cost of self-betrayal, that she longs for community, but not for conformity. This is the hidden heartbreak of the aware mind, to crave intimacy, while knowing that intimacy requires truth, and truth, more often than not, drives people away. Society celebrates the strong, intelligent woman in slogans and hashtags, but in practice it offers her no resting place. If she softens, she's accused of weakness. If she holds her ground, she's told she's unapproachable. She's expected to be endlessly wise, endlessly patient, endlessly composed. And yet, when she falters, when she admits to pain or confusion, people look disappointed, as if brilliance was supposed to make her invincible. But intelligence does not protect you from pain. It deepens it, because you don't just feel, you understand what you feel. You don't just suffer, you analyze the meaning of your suffering. And that double awareness, living and observing your life simultaneously, is both the curse and the crown of consciousness. To see the mechanics of your own heartbreak while still feeling it. To watch your own loneliness with philosophical clarity, that's what it means to be awake. And yet, despite all this isolation, something beautiful begins to happen. Solitude stops feeling like punishment. It becomes space, a laboratory for truth, a sanctuary for thought, a temple for authenticity. In the absence of noise, she begins to hear the subtler voices, intuition, insight, imagination. She starts creating instead of performing. She discovers that solitude doesn't mean being alone with nothing. It means being alone with everything. And that's when the real transformation begins. She no longer seeks belonging by shrinking herself. She no longer edits her mind to fit the room. She no longer apologizes for her intensity, because she realizes what she called too much was simply undiluted being. Her solitude becomes her soil. From it her originality grows. When Jung spoke about individuation, he wasn't describing self-improvement. He was describing the process of becoming whole, of reconciling the opposites within, the thinker and the feeler, the lover and the loner, the light and the shadow. And wholeness is what frightens society most, because a whole person cannot be manipulated. An intelligent woman who knows her own depths becomes ungovernable. Not rebellious in the loud, chaotic sense, but inwardly sovereign. She no longer asks for validation, because she understands that validation is just approval dressed as control. She no longer chases visibility, because she has already seen herself. And that kind of freedom, the quiet kind, unsettles every system built on dependency. It's not that she doesn't love, she loves more deeply than ever, but her love now flows from choice, not from need, from fullness, not from hunger. She can admire others without diminishing herself, and that balance, so rare, so unshakable, feels almost supernatural to those still trapped in performance. They call it detachment. But detachment is not coldness. It's clarity without control. It's the capacity to let life be what it is without the desperate urge to bend it into comfort. And once a woman touches that level of inner authority, she becomes untouchable, not because she walls herself off, but because she no longer negotiates her worth. Every inner awakening eventually meets its test in the outer world, and when she re-enters it, with all her awareness intact, she doesn't fit the old narratives anymore. She's too real for pretense, too awake for manipulation, too grounded for flattery. And so the world, still confused by her quiet strength, does what it always does. It names her wrong. It calls her aloof when she's discerning, intense when she's passionate, difficult when she simply refuses to lie. But she no longer translates herself for those who have no intention of listening. She knows that misunderstanding is often the price of authenticity. That knowledge gives her peace, the rarest kind, not the peace of being unchallenged, but the peace of being undivided. Her mind and her heart no longer fight each other. She can think without guilt, feel without apology, and exist without explanation. And this integration, this union of reason and intuition, is what Jung called individuation, the becoming of the self. To be whole, she had to fracture first. She had to lose her place in the crowd, her comfort in illusion, her faith in simplicity. But the breaking was never destruction, it was reconfiguration. The fragments didn't vanish, they realigned, because every part of her, every rejected instinct, every censored truth had been waiting to return. And when it did, she realized that wisdom isn't about transcending the human experience. It's about inhabiting it fully, the darkness and the light, the doubt and the conviction, the mind that questions and the heart that forgives. Wholeness, after all, is not perfection. It's self-acceptance without anesthesia. It's saying, yes, this is me, entirely. And from that acceptance flows a gentler kind of power, the ability to understand without needing to fix, to love without needing to own, to see without needing to control. There's a quiet revolution that begins when a woman like this walks into a room. She doesn't command attention. She alters the frequency. Her presence changes what others thought possible. Because when you meet someone who has faced herself completely, you can feel it, like gravity, subtle but inescapable. She becomes a mirror for potential, not projection. People don't fear her because she's better. They fear her because she's proof that another way of being exists. One that doesn't depend on approval, or illusion, or constant performance. And once that possibility is seen, the collective can't unsee it. That's how evolution begins, not with rebellion, but with embodiment. Not with slogans, but with the quiet radiance of self-knowledge. So what happens to the intelligent woman who once felt like an outsider? She becomes the architect of her own world. She builds relationships rooted in truth, not performance. She surrounds herself with those who aren't afraid of depth, who can sit in silence without panic, who value questions more than certainty. She stops trying to fit into rooms that were never designed for her light. Instead, she builds new ones, spaces of intellectual safety and emotional honesty. And the irony is, when she stops chasing belonging, true belonging finds her, because belonging in its highest form isn't being accepted by others. It's being accepted by yourself so fully that others are drawn to the calm of your presence. And maybe that's the hidden purpose behind all her solitude, not exile, but initiation. Because every woman who awakens her mind, awakens something in the collective mind as well. She stretches the archetype a little wider, making space for those who come after her to think without shame, to speak without disguise, to love without shrinking. Each one becomes a living bridge between the old world and the new, between the woman who was expected to serve, and the woman who dares to see. This is how society evolves, one consciousness at a time, not through noise but through awareness, not through confrontation but through clarity. Because clarity itself is revolutionary, and the revolution she leads is silent, so silent that most won't notice until it's already changed them. One day she will look back and realize that the fear people felt in her presence was never truly about her. It was about the parts of themselves they had buried. She was just the mirror, the reflection of everything they were capable of becoming, if only they stopped being afraid of their own light. And perhaps that's the most dangerous thing of all, not an intelligent woman, but a woman who has made peace with her intelligence. Because once she does, no one can convince her that clarity is a crime, that softness is weakness, or that power must look like domination. She has become both question and answer, light and shadow, mind and soul. And from that wholeness, she no longer seeks permission to exist. She simply is. At some point, every intelligent woman faces a choice: to keep dimming her mind to fit the world's comfort, or to let her light grow so bright that it forces the world to adjust. Most will choose silence, at least once. It feels safer to be misunderstood quietly than to be seen fully. But suppression is not peace. It's just a pause before truth demands to speak again. Because intelligence, real intelligence, is not about knowing more. It's about seeing more, feeling more, being more. It's about carrying the weight of perception and still choosing wonder. And if the world fears that, let it. Fear has always been the shadow of awakening. So this is not a message to the world, it's a message to you. The woman who's been told she's too much, who learned to edit her sentences before she even speaks, who's mastered the art of sounding smaller just to be heard. You are not intimidating. You are revelation made visible. The discomfort you create in others is the tremor before transformation. Don't shrink for it. Don't apologize for it. Every system that resists your clarity is one that profits from your confusion. And every time you speak truth into that confusion, you become the proof that awareness cannot be erased. The world doesn't need you to be palatable. It needs you to be awake. Carl Jung believed that enlightenment isn't about imagining figures of light. It's about making the darkness conscious. And that's exactly what you do. Every time you refuse to pretend, every time you think for yourself, every time you choose truth over approval, Your intelligence is not a weapon, it's a torch, and the moment you stop hiding it, you stop walking alone, because every light awakens another. That's how a revolution begins, not in noise, but in noticing, not in war, but in awareness. So if the world calls you too much, smile gently and keep walking. Because what they call too much is just the exact amount of light required to end the dark. And one day, when the collective finally learns to see, they'll realize you were never intimidating, you were just the future, arriving early. And now, if you've ever felt that same silence, the kind that comes when your mind sees too much, when your truth makes rooms quieter instead of warmer, share it. Tell me in the comments, what's the deepest isolation you've ever felt for simply being aware? And if you're done hiding that part of yourself, write this: I carry my light without apology. Because every time one of us says it out loud, the world grows a little less afraid of intelligence and a little more ready for it. Thank you for walking this path with me. If you found yourself somewhere in these words, don't forget to subscribe so you don't lose this space where thought and truth still matter.